We are the Childhood Collective, and we have helped thousands of overwhelmed parents find joy and confidence in raising their child with ADHD. I'm Katie, a speech-language pathologist.
And I'm Lori.
And I'm Mallory, and we're both child psychologists. We combine the science of ADHD with the compassion of moms and bring you practical tools you can start using today.
So hit subscribe and let's help your family shine with ADHD.
So when I sat down to prepare for this episode, it kind of forced me to do some self-reflection on all of the things that I'm actually avoiding and having a hard time getting started on in my own life, like hanging the speaker. My husband and I have been putting it off for weeks. Honestly, it only is going to take 2 screws in the wall.
Oh my gosh.
But the thought of getting out the tools, doing the screws, cleaning up, putting it all away, it's overwhelming. And so the sound bar has been sitting on our dresser for weeks.
I totally understand.
The other thing I'm putting off is doing taxes. I'm sure you can relate.
Yes.
Gathering all the documents, filling out the paperwork, scanning it, getting it to our accountant. It just feels so overwhelming. Even though I know when I sit down and do it, it's not going to take that long.
Every year, I'm always like, this is going to be so terrible. And then it takes my husband and I like 2 evenings. And then we're like, oh, that was it.
Yep.
Okay.
Well, that's good. It takes us like multiple weekends, I feel like, to get ours done.
Yeah. So I'm having a really hard time getting started on that. Haven't started. And then the garage. I mean, I can't even go into that. I don't even know where to start with the messy garage, but it's not functional. It needs some help, but I'm not getting started on that.
We just don't have a garage, so that's how we solve that problem.
But, I need to get started on the garage before it gets too hot because in Arizona, I don't know, the garages get up to like 130 degrees in the summer. So, the clock is ticking. So I need to get started on that task. So I need to take some of my own advice. And some of these tasks are bigger than others, but for whatever reason, I'm just having a hard time getting started.
Okay, so today's podcast episode is dedicated to Mallory and her garage, which we're excited to hear an update on that in a couple weeks. But we really see this a lot with kids with ADHD, and I'm sure that no one is surprised to hear me say that a lot of it comes back to executive functions. And if you've been following us for a while, you know that most of the things that we ask our kids to do throughout the day, at school, at home, they don't involve just one executive function, right? We need all those executive functions to be working together at the same time. Yep. And let's take Mal's example, cleaning out the garage. Okay, Mal, so here's what we need. We're just going to do a breakdown here. We need to have some initiation, right? That is a huge executive function. That's the executive function that lets us get started on things. But we also have to have planning. We have to envision like, what is the end goal? What are the steps that it's going to take? Even things like who should be in the plan, right? Like, I don't know if your 6-year-old is helpful to cleaning out the garage.
Definitely not in my case.
So the plan might be calling the mother-in-law and asking for help. So you have to plan it out. You need task monitoring, right? So checking in, are we still on track? Did we accidentally go start setting up some other part of the yard and forget about the garage? You have to use the task of cognitive flexibility. So when things don't go according to your plan, you run out of tubs or there's not enough shelf space. Okay, how can we shift? How can we change this up? And you are going to need emotional control too, which is a very important executive functions because you're going to realize, oh my gosh, Target is out of my tubs that I use. And the immediate reaction is to be super irritated, right? But
for sure,
that emotional control is really going to help, I think.
Yes. Yeah. So the point here is that many of these tasks take a ton of mental effort, even if all the executive functioning skills are working together and working together well. So when our kids with ADHD get confronted with tasks with delayed executive functioning skills, getting started on even simple tasks for them can feel so overwhelming.
Exactly. And I think that's why we get this question so often from parents. How do I help my child just get started? Of course, without, the repeated nagging, the feet dragging, All the big feelings. So today we're going to share our top 5 tips for helping your child get started.
Yep. So I'm going to start with our first tip, which is how to help your child build momentum. So what do I mean by that? When your child is getting started on a task, it's choosing something simple, that's something easy and something that you know that they can do easily independently, and starting with that. And the point of this is once you do something simple and your child gets into that, they can feel this sense of accomplishment. They can feel like they're successful at it, and it kind of builds that momentum of motivation to go on and continue doing something that's a little bit more challenging. So we kind of try to think of it like a snowball effect, in a positive way. So
I love it.
yeah. So in parenting in real life, a great example of this, as a child psychologist, I do a lot of testing, and I have to write these reports, and they're lengthy, sometimes 10, 15, 20 pages long, which is a lot of writing. And so when I have to sit down and write a report, I will do everything in the house other than that. You guys know, because you have to write reports too, and you used to write reports, so you understand this. One of the first things that I always do, and I've gotten really good at, is I start with the reason for the referral, which is like a 1-paragraph thing that I write of why a parent is coming in for an evaluation for their child. So I'm just writing like what the parent is concerned about, and then what are the questions that the parents want to have answered with the evaluation. Does their child have ADHD would be one of them. Again, it's 1 paragraph, and it's not too overwhelming for me. And I know once I sit down and get that done, I feel that sense of accomplishment. My mind is already into that situation. And a lot of times I just go into writing more of it. So that's something for me that I do in my own life. For my kids, homework is a struggle sometimes. And I have one child that just homework can take hours, and it doesn't actually take hours. It's just distractions and getting up and doing other things. And it can be really a struggle for them. We start with, okay, let's sit down and write all of your assignments and look at all of your assignments and say, what is kind of the easiest one for her? It's not even necessarily the smallest assignment, but some kids might do better with like a short assignment. For her, it's more like what's a preferred assignment. So she tends to really like math, and she feels successful at it. And that's a lot faster for her to get it done because it makes sense to her. So we almost always start with math, because once she's much more motivated to get that done once she's in it and doing her homework, then it's easier to get started on the others.
I love it. And that is so personal. I love that you use that example, because my daughter is the opposite. So math for her is like 874 steps in her mind that is going to take until tomorrow. So she would much rather write her 10 spelling words and just knock those out really quickly. But it's so unique. And so really kind of, even letting your kid pick, like, this is the thing that I think will be the easiest.
And sometimes it's something as simple as write your name on the paper. Right? Like for a lot of our kids, like it has to be something very, very simple to get them to do it. All I need you to do is sit down and just write your name right here. That's it. And that's enough to kind of get them into doing homework.
Yep. Something to just kind of get the foot in the door, get in position, get ready to go. So that's a great tip. So Lori's tip here, building momentum. Start with something small to build momentum towards those more challenging tasks. Again, get your kids' input about what that simple task might be, and then hopefully you'll see that snowball effect again in a good way, where starting with something small leads to the more challenging tasks. So the second tip that we have for you today to help your child get started is what we call zeroing in the task. So what do we mean by that? When a task is really big, or it's going to take a long time, or it involves multiple steps, maybe it's steps that have to happen over the course of several days, it can feel so overwhelming. And for our kids with ADHD, it can actually feel just impossible. Your kid has probably said something like that to you before, like, that's impossible. I'll never be able to do that. That's too much. So one way that you can help your child get started is to zero in the task, or break tasks that are large, are going to take a long time, into smaller chunks to make it feel more manageable. Sometimes people call this work chunking. So thinking about how I use this in my own life, zeroing in the task, for example, looking at my kitchen, it feels overwhelming. Backpacks and lunch boxes are everywhere. Spaghetti from last night's meal is like pouring down the front of the cabinet.
Spaghetti is the worst, by the way.
I know, but my kids love it, so we have to have it every week.
Yep.
I know that there's like rotten leftovers in the fridge, so I need to go through the fridge, clean it out. But just all of those things together, it's just really hard to motivate myself to get started because it feels like a very big task. So something that helps me is zeroing in that task by starting with something manageable, like just get all of the dishes in the sink. First, I'm focusing on the dishes. Get them in the sink, get them soaking. And then zeroing in the next task, which is maybe wiping down the front of the cabinets because I have to. This is not something I do regularly, but again, there's spaghetti on the cabinet. So the next task is doing that. So by breaking the big task of like cleaning the whole kitchen into smaller pieces, it becomes more manageable, makes it a little bit more likely that I'm just going to get started rather than putting it off.
I really like that too, just for myself personally, because what happens to me is I will be in the kitchen and I will be like, your example, I'm going to go put, the dishes in the sink. And then I'm like, oh, but this washcloth is kind of dirty. I probably need to start laundry, which then leads me to the laundry room. All of a sudden I'm sorting laundry and I'm like, oh my gosh, we're almost out of bleach. Let me write that on the list. Oh, but I remember now that we're out of almond milk. Let me jot that down. Let me just check because I think we might have extra Parmesan cheese over here. So the next thing you know, I've really I have not loaded the dishes into the sink. And so I love when you say like zero in on the task. And this is challenging for a lot of us. And probably a lot of you parents might be thinking the same, like, oh my gosh, I can't even zero in on the task. But it is a lot of really self-talk and self-coaching that we do as adults. Like, nope, I'm going to focus on these dishes. And I have to do that. I really do. Lately, working from home, I'm leaving my house to go to a coffee shop because that will happen to me constantly. I'll just make the bed. Well, now that I'm making the bed, it reminded me of this. So really zeroing in and using those tools. And again, like as we do that, don't hesitate to do that out loud. Like I really am getting distracted, but I want to go start laundry, but I know that I need to finish these dishes. And our kids are listening and they need to learn that self-talk too, that inner coach, or that, we call that our inner coach. And that's someone that's like in our brain kind of talking through what we're going to do next. So zeroing in is challenging. Like it might sound simple, but it's actually very hard to do.
Yeah. I'm really glad you bring that up. I think that's really important. And another thing that kind of as you're describing, Katie, about how easy it is to get pulled off task if you haven't zeroed in the task. And before you know it, you're doing laundry, you're doing the dishes, you're also checking the cabinet for the Parmesan cheese. Is you have your hands in all of these different things. They're all partially started, but a lot of times nothing is fully followed through on. So you don't get that sense of accomplishment of, I did it. I finished the laundry, or I did it. The kitchen is clean. And our kids with ADHD really need that feedback and that sense of accomplishment, having followed through something from start to finish. They need to kind of feel that internal feeling of like, wow, that feels really good that I finished that and I can fully check that off my list. Because you don't get that same sense of accomplishment when you have your hands in 5, 6 different things and you don't follow anything through all the way to the end. You never get to kind of access that reinforcement, right?
Right. You're kind of living in this like overwhelm, like, oh my gosh, and I need to do this and this and this and this. And you just have to pause for a second and be like, no, no more. We need to focus in on this one thing. It's very hard.
Yeah. And I think that something that we hear a lot from parents, they want tips on helping their child clean their room and keep it organized. And again, this is one of those tasks that can feel very overwhelming for kids, especially if there's dirty clothes and the bed isn't made and the books are everywhere. You tell your child to go clean their room, and that's an instant meltdown. It just feels too insurmountable. They don't even know where to start. But you can help your child by zeroing in the task. So I love Katie's. Katie provides the tip of like creating room zones in the room. So like this is the book zone. This is the bed zone. This is the clothes zone. And that helps your child zero in the task. So rather than saying like, go clean your room, I'll see you in 30 minutes, come to the room with your child and say, what zone should we start with? Okay, let's start with the clothes zone. anything that's dirty, let's get it in the hamper. And anything that's clean, let's get it in the dresser or in the closet. Right now, we're just focusing on the clothes zone. So you've zeroed in the task. Okay, and then if you're in my boys' room, the next step is let's focus on the Lego zone. Get all of the Legos into a pile, and then let's put all of those Legos into the bin that they belong in. So you're really zeroing in the task rather than setting the expectation that you're going to see your child in 30 minutes after they've cleaned their entire room start to finish. You're doing some scaffolding, you're helping them, but you're really zeroing in the task and working through it piece by piece. And again, this gives them the opportunity to feel that sense of accomplishment along the way. So you've taken care of everything in the clothes zone. You get that reinforcement like, all right, clothes are taken care of. That feels good. It's like a discrete task that you followed through start to finish. And again, that's really important for our kids with ADHD who need immediate feedback.
I know my 6-year-old, every time I would ever say it's time to clean the room, it was an automatic meltdown. And I used Katie's advice on the zones and we walked through it. And now when I say that, I don't get that same reaction because there's like a structure in her mind to how to do that. So I've seen it in my own life of how helpful that can be.
I love it. I was just going to say too that when you're thinking about the zones and the level of kind of support that your child needs, that is going to change over time. So the example that Mallory gave is like, okay, we're going to go to the Lego zone and we're going to start by putting them on this tray. And that is obviously a very parent-directed activity. And your child might be at that stage, right? Yep. They might not be ready for you to be like, what zone should we pick? What are your feelings and thoughts about the zone? No, that's okay. You can direct and teach them. And then over time, it does become more and more of like, okay, what do you think? Which zone should we start with? Or even like with my own kids, I'll say my thing is like, I don't want them to put all of their clothes into the hamper. They're not all dirty enough for the hamper. And so I'll really talk that through with them, and help them because again, I'm going to do laundry for like 300 hours and be distracted. So, but I want them to be thinking like, okay, what should I do with this piece of clothing? So that for our family is very like parent directed still. But my goal is that when they're 10, I'm not standing there going, no, you wore that for 30 seconds and then you went outside and you changed your clothes because it was cold. So I just, that's something to keep in mind that you're kind of combining point 1 and point 2 that we've made here, where you're really helping them to zero in on the task. And at the same time, you're building that momentum and helping them start small and then build up.
Yep. And I think another benefit of helping your child zero in the task and eventually transferring that responsibility to them is then a large task has been given discrete pieces and then they can take breaks where they need them to. Again, sometimes it's not a reasonable expectation to expect our child to clean their bedroom start to finish, even when you have broken it down into zones. Sometimes they're going to need a break from challenging tasks, from school projects. Even as adults, there's research to show that chunking work and taking breaks in between those chunks actually makes us more productive. So rather than sitting down and expecting yourself to work for an entire hour, expecting yourself to work for 20 minutes and then giving yourself a 5-minute break, you end up at the end having been more productive with your time building in those breaks. So you're setting your child up to use that skill in the future as well. So our second tip here, zeroing in the task. There's a lot of benefits of helping your child learn how to work chunk, zero in their tasks.
I love it. So a third idea that we like to teach parents is to help your child to kind of see the future. And what do we mean by that? We talk about the idea of a future picture. And this comes from the work of Sarah Ward, who's a speech language pathologist who studies executive function and helps really break these things down for parents. But what we know is that as parents and, those of us in helping professions like psychologists and speech pathologists, we spend a lot of time talking to our kids. And for kids with ADHD, that can be too much talking, right? We don't always need to talk it out. What can actually be really helpful for kids with ADHD is to see the ultimate goal. So in the example of the bedroom, we would actually think about those zones and we would maybe snap a photo of what the bookshelf zone looks like when the books are all on the shelf. And what does it look like when my bed is actually made? And every family has a different future picture, right? Like the family where my grandparents, when I would visit them, they would expect hospital corners on the bed when they say make the bed. Okay. In my house, like make the bed is a much looser term. We kind of like pull the big blanket up and then maybe throw some stuffed animals on there. It looks cute. So, that is a different future picture, but that is so important. And having a future picture is really helpful for kids with ADHD. And I'm literally talking about a picture. When I say future picture, people don't always know that. I literally mean you can snap a photo or you can draw a picture. Going back in our blog, back to when we were just starting out, I remember having my daughter draw her closet and what would it look like when her closet was finished. And so I think she was like 4 and a half or 5 years old.
I remember that photo. It was so cute.
She drew her little princess dresses and So, but that at that time, she was really into drawing and she loved to color, and she would sit down and draw what's it going to look like once we bake daddy a cake, or what's it going to look like once we clean out our closet. And this really helps us to move forward towards our goal. And if you don't believe me, let's think of it in terms of adults, right? So when we have something hard, like Mallory's example of the messy garage, it can be so helpful to picture not only what is my garage going to look like, but even more important, what am I going to feel like when I drive my car into my super clean, organized garage? How's it going to feel when I can walk outside and find a screwdriver immediately and not have to like parse through boxes of stuff? And that's what we want to do for our kids. So when we think of, our kids that come home, like my daughter's working on a project for school, and it's a really neat project. It's like ancient Rome, and they got to pick their topic, and it took her a really long time because decisions are tricky. That's another podcast episode, I think, helping kids with ADHD make decisions. But she is, it took her a long time. She picked Pompeii, the city of Pompeii, that if you don't know, quick history lesson, Pompeii was basically destroyed by a volcano back in the day. I don't know which day exactly. That's her expertise, I guess. But Mount Vesuvius erupted and covered this little town, or medium-sized town, in ash and lava. And so as she started to think about it, she's like, I need to build this model. And what we did right away is we busted out the idea of the future picture. We sat down with paper and she drew a picture. My husband, who has a background in architecture, started drawing a future picture. And we sort of talked about like, what do we like about this one and that one? And she drew out a model, and she has now almost completed her project, and it looks a lot like the model. She has a box and a really cool picture of Pompeii, and she built an entire volcano. But the reason that she had clarity of what to do and the steps and the order to do it was because we all had the same future picture. And then she starts telling me, we're going to make it so it's erupting and fire and ash is coming out of it. And all of a sudden we had to be like, whoa, hang on. We need to go back to the future picture, right? Because all of a sudden we don't have the same future picture. And so when we think about using the future picture in real life, what you're really doing is you're helping your child with ADHD visualize their end goal. You're helping them visualize, where am I going? And when you don't have a clear future picture, it is much easier to get off task. And so that is just a really important way that parents can support executive functioning, is by helping their child develop and create this mental image of, what am I working towards?
I love it. Yeah. This one's one of my favorite tips. It's great for so many things. So the future picture, actually take that picture, draw a picture, help your child see the future picture to help them get started.
Yeah. And our next point is helping kids externalize time. So I'm sure many of you, if you've been following along with us for a long time or listening to things on ADHD, you might have heard the idea of kids with ADHD having time blindness. They have a hard time conceptualizing and understanding time. So when you say, okay, we need to sit down for homework, your child might be thinking, oh my gosh, in their mind, it's going to take hours, whereas it's actually, going to take them maybe 10 minutes to get it done. But in their mind, that's how they view it. The other area where you might see it is, you go and you say, we have an hour for screens, and your child gets on their iPad and they're playing games, and an hour comes along, time to get off. And they're saying to you, what? We just started.
Yes.
I've only been on for 5 minutes. And again, they really don't understand and feel that passage of time. For us as parents, things that we do to help ourselves is, for work, I have my Google Calendar and I put in my appointments for the day, and I can see at the beginning of my day what it's going to look like. And I know how it's going to feel. And I can see, okay, I'm spending this much time on this task and this much time on this one. And I have a visual picture of what that looks like. Our kids don't necessarily have that, although we've had some tools on our Instagram of maybe doing that for them and helping them visualize what their time looks like after school or before school and things like that. In real life, for your kids, having tools, like one of the things that we really love is Time Timer, which is a visual timer where kids can you can turn it to 15 minutes and they can see that time running out, basically. So they can, and you could even use, those timers, those hourglass timers, for instance, are one where maybe it's for a minute or two. You can see the sand going down. You can see that passage of time. It helps them to visualize that. I know I have to do a lot of testing with kids and kids with ADHD and kids that really don't want to have to do reading, writing, and math. And it takes a lot of focus. And I use the Time Timer in my testing situation so many times because I'll have kids that they're constantly asking, when is this going to be over? When do I go home? How long is this going to take? And it eliminates a lot of those questions because we just set that timer and I let them know ahead of time, hey, we work for 20 minutes and then we take a 5-minute break. We work for 20 minutes, we take a 5-minute break. And that structure really helps them and they can see that time kind of passing.
Yeah, so that pairs nicely with our second tip, which was zeroing in the task, right? Or work chunking. Yep. Add in a visual timer to help your child actually visualize the passage of time, how long you want them to be cleaning their room. Makes it a little bit easier to get started. Even I use the Time Timer in my home. My boys love Bluey. Bluey episodes are about 7 minutes long. They're very short. I can show them on the face of the Time Timer clock, like, this is 7 minutes. This is how long a Bluey episode lasts. I want you to pick up for 5 minutes. That's even less. Look, less than the length of a Bluey episode, and they can actually see it on the clock face.
Yep.
So it starts to feel a lot more manageable when you see, oh, wow, less than the length of an episode of Bluey. I can do that.
Right. That's actually a really good point, Mal. And I wanted to just jump in and mention that the thing that's really great about the Time Timer, and parents, you don't need a Time Timer if you feel like you could do this with a different clock, but you want to have the analog piece, right? Like the clock that actually shows the sweeping passage of time. When we look at a lot of what we use today on our iPhones, all over the microwave, the oven, the stove, it all has a digital clock. And that is just numbers that are sort of flipping, and kids do not. I mean, my daughter is in 3rd grade and she's just learning how to subtract, like 245 to 325 is how long. That is something that kids do not understand. They can't understand digital numbers. So the idea of the Time Timer, one of the things we love about it is that it is analog. The time is actually sweeping. It's actually passing and you can see the hand moving. So thinking about that too, and just flipping out some of the clocks in your house to have clocks that actually show the movement of time can be really helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. So that 4th tip, externalizing time, leading into our last tip here, which is something that we call I do, we do, you do. And this is really great for tasks that perhaps your child is still growing independence with, maybe a skill that they're still growing, or perhaps not. Maybe it's something that they already know how to do, but you just, again, want to get them started on the task. As the name implies, you do it first. So let's say your child is sitting down with a long math assignment, and maybe it's a newer concept to them. They're learning how to do long division. First step is I do. Okay, as the parent, I am going to do this long division problem. If you can figure out how kids are supposed to do it nowadays, that's a whole nother thing, right?
Oh my goodness.
That's maybe you're Googling. Yeah.
Maybe you're Googling it first.
Makes my head want to explode. It's a nightmare.
Yeah. So after you've Googled how to do it, you do it for your child first. So I do. So you're showing them how to do a long division problem. The next step is we do. So then you're working on it together. And then you do. So then you're transferring the responsibility to your child now that you've they've watched you do one, you've done one together, and now the responsibility is on them to do the remaining items on their worksheet and finish. This is really great with longer assignments. And again, it comes back to that piece of like building some momentum. This is a way to get your foot in the door. The first step is really easy for your child. All they have to do is watch you do the math problem. The next step, a little more challenging because you're going to ask for their help, but then you've built that momentum and your child is ready to kind of hit the ground running. And also, as you're doing the I do and the we do part of this, you're able to gauge your child's level of skill with the task. And is it really appropriate to your child's skill level? And, I feel like so many of these tips are coming back to doing homework with your kids. And I think part of that is because we just know homework is really challenging for kids with ADHD, and not necessarily because they don't know actually how to do it, but it's because of all the executive functions that are involved in that process. A big piece of it, just the initiation. Again, that feeling, coming back to the tip of externalizing time, that feeling that this is going to take forever, 20 problems. Are you kidding me? I'm never going to be able to do that.
And the fact that they've been doing that all day at school,
Yep.
and they're like, oh my gosh, I have to do this again. They're maxed out. They're maxed out by homework time.
For sure. So another way to kind of get your foot in the door, help your child get started, try that I do, we do, you do strategy and see how that helps.
I love it. So as our key takeaway for today, we just want to encourage you to offer empathy to your child. So as you implement these tips and you try these different things, keep in mind that for kids with ADHD, their executive functioning skills are delayed approximately 30%. And that is really impacting their ability to get started, stay focused, follow tasks all the way through to completion. Like, this is not a behavioral challenge. This is really, truly difficult for them. And if today, as we've talked through executive function, you're like, I have questions, that is okay. We totally understand because this is a complicated topic. And so we've actually put together a guide for you that is our 6 keys for helping you raise a happy and independent child with ADHD. It is a free guide that goes over a lot of the most important things that parents need to understand as they parent their child with ADHD. And just keeping in mind too that as we share these tools and we have empathy for our kids, really first and foremost, we want you to know that you are not enabling your child with helping them in this way. You are supporting them based on their needs and meeting them right where they're at. And these tools are actually really empowering for your child. So keep that in mind. And as always, we are here to support you. Thanks for listening to Shining with ADHD by your hosts, Lori, Katie, and Mallory of the Childhood Collective.
If you enjoyed this episode, please like this video and hit subscribe so you can be the first to know when a new episode airs.
If you are looking for links and resources mentioned in this episode, you can always find those in the show notes. See you next time.